As Old as Time, Part 1. Death and a Curse. In the sleepy little village, Maurice kept improving his inventions, and Rosalind refined her bespelled roses. All the while, both were learning how to properly feed and butcher their chickens, milk the goats, tend the bees, and other new and unfamiliar chores of country life. Belle grew, reading voraciously, running around barefoot, watching the clouds and dreaming of a life beyond the fields and the plants. The days so similar they all seemed to roll into one. Meanwhile, in their old kingdom, the fever redoubled its strength. It began to spread faster, just like the plague had in horrible days long before. It utterly destroyed the population. Young or old, rich or poor, man or woman, it didn't matter. People were dying like rats in the town below, while the king and queen hid themselves in their high castle and barricaded their doors against potential contamination. No one was allowed in or out, including the servants, and therefore Elric. But the village where Rosalind and Maurice and Belle lived seemed strangely unaffected by the disease rampaging around them. Perhaps it was because of their other towns' closed borders and quarantine. Or it perhaps was because of Rosalind's wards, or a certain quick-growing oak tree, or the special broth made by another relocated good witch. Whatever the reason, not a single person west of the river was affected, nor were the other villages that received the fleeing Charmans. And then, late one dire, rainy night, long after Belle was put to bed a third time after trying to read under the covers with a jar of fireflies, there was a knock on the door. Rosalind and Maurice looked at each other once and leapt up, expecting to see their dear old friend again. Instead, an unknown person stood hunched over in a cold, pale, milky moon, making his tired eyes seem even more sunken. You were to come to the castle at once. The king and queen would see you. We are no longer citizens of that far kingdom, Rosalind said with a barely contained snarl. We do not need to obey any demands or requests of the rulers there. They hold my allegiance no longer. Maurice put his hands lightly on her shoulders, curiosity always stronger in him than outrage. What do they want? The man sighed. The disease which ravages the countryside is now inside the castle walls, killing royalty and servants alike. But Rosalind trailed off whatever she was going to say, her anger deflated in the face of needless death and the worry in the messenger's eyes. Perhaps he too had a loved one who was sick. Rosalind looked back at Maurice. You should go, he urged. People are in trouble, and you could see Elric once you're inside the castle. That would be good. All right. My husband is a kinder man than I. Rosalind was suddenly swirling a warm gray cloak around her neck. But I shall make my own way there, just as you must take yours wherever you would go now. After she disappeared into the night, Maurice was left somewhat awkwardly with the exhausted messenger. Can't have you in, he said apologetically. Plague and all. I could get you a cup of tea. Would you like, which you could take with you as a souvenir? The castle was very different from the last time Rosalind had been there. Lights were dim, and servants kept to the shadows. The deep chanting of priests echoed in the corridors. There was so much incense clouding the air she almost couldn't breathe. The king and queen were on their thrones, looking tired. The boy prince was nowhere to be seen. Enchantress, the queen said, her voice a little scratchy, but otherwise as firm as ever. You were given for the high crime of breaking quarantine. In return, we will ask you to use your powers you possess to secure the safety and health of your royal selves and the castle. Rosalind blinked. What? She asked, for once in her life at a loss for words. The queen stated it quite clearly, the king snapped. You have, out of the graciousness of our hearts, cleared you of illegally crossing the border to fly like a coward from our kingdom in distress. In gratitude, perhaps, you will fix this. He waved a hand vaguely around the room, trailing a handkerchief that no longer smelled of perfume and flowers, but of salts and bitter medicines in hopes of warding off the plague. I am not a criminal, Rosalind stated as calmly as she could. I fled this nightmare of a place and live in a new one now, where no one smears insults on my door, and my neighbors don't just disappear without investigation because of their background. You can forgive me if imaginary crimes are not as you like. I have no desire to come back here ever again, and your words are meaningless. Go fetch yourself a doctor and be done with it. The doctors who remain have been unable to effect any cure or treatment, the king added, choosing his words carefully. Frederick is apparently a gifted surgeon, but a terrible healer. All who could have helped you have disappeared or been forced into exile, Rosalind hissed. If one were more religious-minded, one would think God had brought this down on you to punish you for your sins. I am a king, the king said, his ignorance returning. God alone may judge me. The queen waved her hand at him. If you must blame us, do so, but help us. We beg you to save what is left of us, what is left of the castle. Never, Rosalind spat. The last free country of Les Charmants is gone because of the atrocities perpetuated while you looked on without so much as lifting a finger. I will never help you. The room was silent, though because all within it were stunned of just weary, it was hard to tell. We ordered you here for a spell, not a lecture, the king finally said with a sniff. Do not try to debate morality with us, you base creature. Rosalind spun around and began to walk out. Wait! The queen leapt up. My son! I have a son. You have a daughter. I don't care what happens to the rest of the kingdom. I don't care what happens to us. But please, he is truly innocent of anything we've ever done. Rosalind spun back. Innocent? My daughter was at risk in your kingdom because her mother is one of Les Charmains, and you think your son should be safe because you were a queen? Please, was all the queen said, her eyes lowered. The king looked away and said nothing. I shall consider it, Rosalind said coldly. While I am here, considering it, I wish to see your stable master. He's an old friend of my husband's. Who? The king asked, sounding utterly uninterested. Your stable master, Elric Potts. We haven't seen him since you barricaded your gates and hid yourself in the castle with your trusted servants, forbidding them to leave. Oh, the horse fellow. He's gone, the king said, rolling his eyes. Disappeared. Just up and left when things grew tough, I assume. Ran away from his family in the quarantine. If he's dead, it isn't of the plague. They haven't found his body, the queen added. I almost hope he is dead. The prince has been utterly inconsolable without his daily ride. All he does is cry about his horse. Servants never consider the consequences of their actions, how it affects others. Elric Potts would never just run away. A wind of rage and agony built inside of Rosalind, threatening to tear her and everything in the room apart. Instead, the enchantress let it take her and carry her home. Weeping and exhausted, she related all what happened to Maurice while he held her. When she had no more to say, Rosalind straightened up and jerkily made the motions that cleared the house of pestilence. Then she went over to Belle's doorway and made additional sighs that hung green a moment in the air before trailing to the door like vines. Safe. Maurice clapped her sadly on the shoulder. I understand your decision to not help them, especially after hearing about Elric, he said quietly. But overall, I'm not sure that was the kindest thing to do. They didn't protect my people. Their people. Their subjects. They are repercussions for actions. Magic comes back to you just as the actions of people do. The bigger the person, the more their actions affect the world. If they live, perhaps, they will learn that. And if everyone dies, no one learns anything, he pointed out gently. Rosalind remained silent, but her fingers started twitching, working. Deep in the castle in the woods, silver sparkles fell over those ignorant of the doings of enchantresses and inventors. The prince is safe? Her husband asked. Rosalind nodded. As are the servants and their children. The couple was silent for a moment. If something were to happen to me, Rosalind began slowly. Nothing is going to happen to you, my dear, Maurice said, giving her a kiss. You can't get the fever. But if it were something else, anything else, she said, thinking, I would want Belle to be safe. I would want my people to be safe. I don't know how you could do that, Maurice said with a sigh. You're the most powerful sorceress left in the world, but even you can't protect everyone. I would make everyone else forget, she said, slowly thinking. Forget about me and Les Charmants. We would become nothing but fairy tales and hide forever from the eyes of men. That seems sad, but pragmatic, Maurice said, putting his arms around her waist. Just don't include me in the spell. I don't care what happens to me. I never want to forget you. Rosalind smiled and kissed him, but didn't answer.